Let me say something that might mess some of y'all up right quick. Most of y'all don't actually know how to date. Y'all know how to vibe and hope it works out. That's it. That's your whole strategy. And when it don't work out, you be shocked, heartbroken, confused, talking about, I wasted my time. No, you skipped the instructions. You bypassed the process. So before we start arguing about men versus women, what is masculinity and what is femininity, complain about attachment styles, start labeling people as narcissists, or blaming relational dynamics on who deserves what and who is supposed to do what for who, we got to slow this conversation all the way down and define what we're actually talking about, because words matter. And when you don't understand the words you're loving and living by, you end up spending your entire life building whole relationships on just vibes, assumptions, and feelings with no structure to hold anything together. That's chaos and drama, with good intentions, but still chaos and drama. In my coaching and personally, I like to start with definitions and etymology on purpose. Not to be academic, not to sound intelligent, even though I clearly am, but because definitions tell you what something is actually for. If you misuse a tool long enough, you'll think the tool is broken when really you just never knew what the tool was designed to do. That's dating for a lot of us, especially in the Black community. So let's start with the definition and etymology of the word dating. Dating is the verb for the word date. A date is defined as a social or romantic appointment set for a specific time. Already, that should tell you something. Dating is not forever. Dating has a start. Dating has a stop. Dating is time-bound by definition. And if it's not time-bound, it's not dating. It's just vibing with feelings involved. Now here's the part nobody ever told us, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. The word date is also derivative from the root word data, which means information. And data is derivative of the word dare, which means to give. This means dating is not about commitment. Dating is a period of time to give and collect information. That's it. Not loyalty, not sacrifice, not, we've been talking for a minute, so what are we? A period of time to give and collect information. Dating is the phase where people are giving data about who they are and collecting data to decipher their preferences, how they live, how they communicate, how they handle stress, money, sex, conflict, responsibility. Do they take accountability? Do they know how to heal, critically think, communicate, compromise, make good decisions? So if you're dating somebody and constantly asking, where is this going? Or what are we? Too soon. The better question during the dating phase is, what am I learning? Because dating is not about choosing someone. Dating is about exploring and observing. And a lot of us skip the exploration and observation phase because your feelings got loud early. Attraction be strong, chemistry be hitting, sex most likely involved. And now, instead of watching and learning, we're attaching and possessing. That's how people get confused. Now, don't get it twisted. We're human, in the flesh. Feelings happen, desires happen, sex happens. But wisdom says, Be wise in your sexual energy. Be transparent, not just honest. And be safe. Protect yourself. And yes, there's a difference. Honesty is telling the truth. Transparency is telling the whole context. Honesty says, I like you. I want you. Transparency says, I like you and I'm still learning what I want, and here's where I'm at emotionally, sexually, and relationally. One builds clarity, the other builds confusion with good intentions, but still confusion, which ultimately breeds resentment. A lot of us say that we want intentional dating, but we don't want intentional conversations. We want the result of clarity without doing the work of gathering information. That's like trying to graduate without ever showing up to class. Then we blame the school. So let me put it plain. Dating is not about proving yourself. Dating is not about auditioning for commitment. Dating is not about looking to lock somebody down. Dating is about asking, does this make sense for my life? And answering that question based on information, not romantic fantasies that you want the other person's shoes to fill. Because vibes are temporary, patterns are permanent. If dating feels confusing, it's usually because you're trying to make dating do a job it was never designed to do. Dating cannot give you security. Dating cannot give you guarantees. Dating cannot give you a future. Dating gives you data, and data is neutral. It's what you do with it that determines the outcome. A lot of us weren't taught this. We were taught to move fast, hold tight, and hope love fixes everything. So we attach before we assess. We commit before we clarify. We stay because of time spent, not information gathered. And then we wonder why relationships feel chaotic, even traumatic. So before we talk about attachment styles, before we talk about intimacy, before we talk about emotional safety, we got to define and then get honest about the very first step. Dating is not about choosing. Dating is about learning. And if you don't respect the learning phase, you'll keep repeating lessons instead of progressing through the stages. So boom, now that we understand what dating is actually for, information, not commitment, this is where people usually mess it up next. Because once feelings start feeling mutual, once attraction is consistent, once you then spent time and gathered some data, people think they automatically graduated. Like, oh, we've been talking for a minute. We're basically together. No, you're not. You just passed dating 101. Now we enter courtship. And this is where shit gets real. Let's break the word down because, again, words matter. Courtship is a combined word, meaning it's two words, court and ship, combined to make one. A court is an open space where a game is played, or a place of governance and authority. A space you enter to plead a case or seek something, which already tells you something very important. When you move from dating into courtship, you're no longer just exploring and observing from the outside. You're stepping into each other's court, into each other's worlds, your environment, your family and friends, your routines, your values and traditions, your community, your career and business. And that's extremely vulnerable. Because now it's not just about how you feel about each other. Now it's about how each of you live. See, dating is private. Courtship is semi-public. This is where family starts knowing names. Friends start meeting options. Circles begin to overlap. And that's intentional because you can hide a lot in private. It's harder to hide patterns when your life is visible. Now, let's talk about the ship part. A ship is a vessel. It's not aesthetics, it's not vibes. It's meant to take you somewhere, which means courtship has direction. There's movement, there's intention, there's a destination in mind. And here's the bar people, mostly my ladies, are gonna hate. If there's no direction, no intention, no conversation about where this is going, you're not courting. You're just dating longer with feelings and sex involved and coupled with expectations nobody agreed to. This is where resentment is born. Courtship is not, we like each other more. Courtship is, we're intentionally exploring alignment. Alignment in values, lifestyle, communication, expectations, pace, and future vision. This is not the phase for assumptions. This is the phase for clarity. And let me say something important here. Courtship does not automatically mean exclusivity. I know, deep breath, ladies. You can choose to court non-exclusively or exclusively. The difference is transparency. You don't sneak, you don't lie, you don't let people assume. Because courtship without transparency is manipulation with a romantic filter. Also, this part matters. Access is adjustable. You can promote someone from dating to courtship, and you can demote them right back. Because promotion is based on information, and demotion is not punishment, it's discernment. Access is not permanent during courtship. It's earned, maintained, and sometimes revoked. That's grown folk shit, but a lot of y'all ain't ready. Courtship works best when clarity is the standard, not secrets or what men like to label as privacy, not vibes, not we'll see how it goes while we share feelings and sex. Clarity. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are we building toward? If nobody can answer that, you're not in courtship. You're in what y'all like to call a situationship with half-assed communication. And let me say this gently but clearly. Courtship is not about possession. It's about consideration. It's about seeing someone clearly and letting them see you clearly before life-altering decisions are made. Because feelings can blind you. Sex is a huge distraction, but clarity and structure protects you. This is where a lot of y'all get uncomfortable because courtship requires slowing down while still being more intentional. And we weren't taught that. We were taught, if it feels good, hold on tight as fuck. If it's consistent, don't ask questions. If time has passed, you're now obligated. No. Feeling good does not last forever. Consistency without direction is just basic routine. Time spent does not equal alignment in love and life. So if you've ever felt like, I thought we were moving this somewhere, or I assumed this meant more, I didn't know we weren't on the same page. That wasn't intuition failing you. That was courtship never being defined in the first place. Dating gathers information. Courtship tests the direction. And if courtship is confusing, it's usually because somebody wants the benefits of closeness. They want your attention and affection without the responsibility of clarity. And that's not love. That's convenience. So now that we've slowed this part down, the next question becomes, what happens when courtship does have direction? What happens when intention is mutual? What happens when alignment looks possible? That's when we start talking about engagement. And no, I'm not talking about rings yet. I'm talking about negotiation. And that's where most couples, especially Black couples, really get uncomfortable. Because love is cute, but negotiation is honest. And honesty changes things. All right, bet. This is where most people really start acting funny, because once courtship has direction, once intentions are mutual, once alignment in love and life looks possible, this is where engagement is supposed to happen. And before anybody starts screaming about rings and timelines, let me say this clearly. Engagement is not an aesthetic. It's not a proposal video. It's not a Pinterest board. It's not a photo shoot. And it's damn sure not just a ring for the internet. Engagement is a strategic process. Let's define it. To engage literally means to enter into an agreement, to bind oneself, to participate fully. So the real question is not, am I engaged? The real question is, engaged in what? Because engagement is the period in which you engage in negotiations, marriage negotiations. And yes, negotiation makes people uncomfortable because love feels soft and sweet and negotiations feel grown and direct. But grown is mature and maturity is necessary. Engagement is where you stop talking about vibes and start talking about real life. This is where you discuss roles, responsibilities, expectations, beliefs, values, finances, debt, family dynamics, children or no children, how many, career paths, purpose, lifestyle, boundaries, conflict resolution, support systems. Not just wedding colors, menus, cake flowers, and the reception playlists and seating charts. The wedding is the celebration that you've come to terms. The marriage is the covenant. The engagement is where you decide if that covenant actually makes sense long-term for the rest of your life. Now let's talk about the ring, because I know some of y'all already typing. The ring matters. There you go, ladies. I said it. The ring matters, but not because it's shiny, not because it's expensive for the sake of flexing, but because it's symbolic and practical. The ring is visible. It signals intention to the world. It says, I am no longer moving as an individual. There is accountability to another attached to me now. That matters. And yes, the cost of the ring matters too. Hold on, gentlemen. Allow me to provide perspective before you come for me. The cost of the ring matters, not because love has a price tag, but because resources reflect the reality. The ring is often the first tangible demonstration of planning and prioritization, financial alignment, sacrifice, foresight. It's not about draining yourself, gentlemen. It's about showing that you can prepare, plan, and commit materially, not just emotionally. Love with no planning, structure, and resources is just pretty poetry. Love with planning, structure, and resources gives sustainability to building your legacy. And here's another truth y'all love to avoid. The ring is not the goal. The ring is the entry point into responsibility. Because once engagement happens, the conversation shifts. You're no longer asking, do we like each other? You're asking, can we build a life together without destroying each other? That's a different level of honesty and transparency. It requires a depth of vulnerability unlike any other bond. And here's the extra grown part. You are allowed to call off an engagement if the negotiations don't work. Let me say that again for the people in the back. You are allowed to call off an engagement if the negotiations don't work. Calling off an engagement is not failure. It's discernment. It's wisdom. It's choosing clarity over fantasy. It's deciding not to force alignment just because a ring exists. A ring does not override incompatibility. A lot of us were taught to push through because we already made it this far. But far doesn't mean it's healthy. Time invested does not equal obligation. And love does not require self-betrayal. Engagement is where you see the cracks clearly. Not to judge them, but to decide if you can live with them for the rest of your life. Nobody marries perfection, but you do negotiate what you're willing to live with and what you're not willing to live with. So, if engagement feels heavy, good. It's supposed to. Because this is the phase where you stop pretending and start planning. Where honesty and transparency replaces feelings and romance-only thinking. Where structure starts protecting real love. Dating gives and gathers information. Courtship tests alignment and direction. Engagement negotiates the reality. And if negotiations scare you, it's not because you're not in love. It's because love alone has never been enough to sustain a life together. And that brings us to the final piece. Marriage. Not the wedding, not the aesthetics, the actual covenant. And why skipping structure here at engagement turns love and marriage into another survival story. All right, now we made it. Marriage. And I need to be very clear here because this is where people really confuse the hell out of things. Marriage is not the wedding. Marriage is not the aesthetic of a nice home together. Marriage is not the pictures and reels for social media. Marriage is a covenant, a binding agreement, a long-term partnership, a decision to build, protect, and grow something bigger than your feelings. And that's why all these steps leading up to marriage matters. Because when you skip clarity and structure on the front end, marriage turns into resentment and survival on the back end. Marriage is not supposed to be where you figure it out. Marriage is where you execute what you already discussed, negotiated, and agreed on. That's why this whole intentional dating framework exists. Not to slow love down, but to keep love from becoming another stressor or traumatic experience. And this is where I want to zoom out real quick. Because this framework isn't just about romance and marriage. At the end of the day, marriage is not for everybody. This framework is also about how we move through life, The same way we misuse dating language is the same way we misuse commitment in friendships, business, and community. We stay vague, we stay unintentional, we stay emotionally sloppy, then wonder why nothing feels secure. Let's talk about these words we throw around so casually. Chill, vibe, hang out, hook up, situationship. Even labels like my man, my old lady, my boyfriend and girlfriend. A lot of these words and labels sound harmless, but they're misleading as hell when your end goal is marriage. Because none of those words tell you what stage you're in. Because none of those titles truly matter outside of fiance and wife and husband. They don't define direction. They don't define responsibility. They don't define expectations. They don't define roles. They keep everything comfortable, easy, and unclear. Chill means nothing is required. Vibe means no accountability. Hangout means no intention. Hookup means access without responsibility. Situationship literally means we both know this ain't structured, but we staying anyway. And then we slap titles like boyfriend, girlfriend, or my man and my lady on top of the confusion and call it commitment. That's how people end up in situations where they're loyal to people for 3-4 years while never building toward the same future. See, language shapes behavior. When the words are loose, the structure is loose. When the structure is loose, feelings get hurt. Not because people are evil, but because expectations were not aligned, sometimes not even discussed. Marriage requires clarity, and clarity requires honesty and transparent language. Not sweet language, not trendy language, not avoidant language. Intentionally honest and transparent language. Because if you say you want marriage, but your whole dating life is built on vibes, you're walking in the opposite directions. And let me say this plainly. Marriage is not for people who hate structure. Marriage is long-term structure. Shared vision, shared responsibility, shared accountability, shared legacy. That doesn't make it cold and rigid. It makes it healthy and safe. This is why skipping steps is dangerous. When you skip dating as information, you choose blindly off the feelings and sex. When you skip courtship as direction, you move without intention and alignment. When you skip engagement as negotiation, you commit without clarity. And when you skip clarity, marriage becomes another place you have to survive instead of thrive. And for us, especially Black folks, this matters deeply because we inherited survival. We inherited endurance. We inherited make it work. We inherited stay down. We inherited silence. But marriage is not supposed to be another site of sacrifice where somebody loses themselves. Marriage is supposed to be a shared structure that supports two whole people. So if you take nothing else from this whole conversation, take this. Dating is for learning. Courtship is for direction. Engagement is for negotiation. Marriage is for covenant. When you respect the process, love has room to breathe. When you ignore the process, love turns into another lesson you gotta heal from. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about choosing structure and clarity so love doesn't have to keep paying the price for confusion. And once you understand that, you stop chasing labels. You stop romanticizing chaos. You stop settling for vibes when you actually want a life full of love. And that shift, that's where real love begins.